So now the epoxy's had a chance to set for a couple of days and it's completely cured. So the next step in this process is going to be sanding this down and getting everything prepped for the varnish. Now I'm going to be sanding the epoxy down with some 220 grit, and I'm going to be doing the face with the sander, but I'm going to be doing the edges and the sides by hand just because I don't want to accidentally burn through. And I'm doing this outdoors because I don't want to have the dust floating around inside the air where I'm going to be doing my varnishing. So I'm trying to work in between rain clouds today, and I think I've got about 10-15 more minutes before the next round hits. So hopefully I'll be able to get this done and we can move back indoors where I won't have to worry about it. So what is it they say about best laid plans? Well, I can tell you it started to rain on me outside, so I had to move everything indoors. Now, it still doesn't change the fact that when I'm sanding, I don't want to create any dust in here because this is where I'm going to be doing my varnishing. So the way I'm going to try and work around this is by wet sanding. Now, the sander that I'm going to be using, it's a 3-inch model or the 3-inch unit from Quick Cut Sanders. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about them in my next episode. But for right now, this is just kind of a last-minute switch for me going to plan B. So this is going to be the first time that I've used this sander for this type of application. Normally I'm using it for sanding down gel coat repairs and painting projects, but I haven't had a chance to play around with it yet for doing a varnishing job. So this will be kind of fun. Well, this worked out really slick, and I think I've kind of found the way that I'm going to be prepping all of my varnish jobs from here on out. If you take a closer look, you can see there are a few spots here and there that are still a little shiny. Those are areas that I didn't hit with the sander. And I'm going to come back by hand and hit these few little spots just because I didn't want to work it too hard with the sander and accidentally burn through. So I'm going to let this set overnight and dry, and then tomorrow do my last little touch-ups, and we'll be laying down the varnish tomorrow then, I guess. So now I came in this afternoon and I did my last little bit of sanding that needed to be done on here from basically hitting the spots that got missed with the sander last night. Now I've gone through and done my final cleanup on here. Now because this is an epoxy based, I did my last wipe down or final wipe down with acetone. Now from here forward, acetone will not be touching this because we're going to be working with varnish. And varnish and acetone just don't mix. So, but for right now, since we're layering up on epoxy, final wipe down with acetone, and everything should be good, ready to go. Now, I'm going to be using a badger hair brush. Now, you can use a foam brush. However, if you decide to go that route, I would recommend doing 1 or 2 additional coats, just because foam brushes, although they put down a nice film, a nice level film, they typically put down a really thin film. And when you're working with varnish, the name of the game is buildup, or film thickness. So because I'm going to be working with the badger hair, I think I should be able to get away with doing 2 to possibly 3 coats. And I'm going to be starting with an unthinned varnish. And the brand what we're going to be doing for our first couple of coats is Petit's, their 2015. It's their flagship. Now, I'm going to be using 2 different varnishes on here. My first 2 coats are going to be with the 2015. And the reason I'm using that first is because the 2015 has a much higher level of UV filters, UV blockers built in. And then my final coat is going to be with their 1015. Now, the differences between the two they're pretty minimal, but the key difference that I've noticed is that the 2015 has a better UV filter level. However, the 1015 has a little harder finish and a little higher gloss than the 2015. So I found by doing with this combo, the 2015 for the build-up, 1015 for the finish coat, you get an excellent result. So I've already gone through and mixed up my varnish. I mixed up roughly 4 ounces here in the cup. Now, when I'm working with a brand new can of varnish, once I get to this point, where the grains are already filled, I usually don't thin it at all. I don't thin the varnish at all. However, this can was half used, and when they sit in the can, they can get a little thick. So I've gone through and I poured up roughly 4 ounces of varnish and added maybe 1/4 ounce of thinner, just to loosen it up a little bit and give me some working time so the air bubbles can work themselves out before it starts to skin over. So at this point, I believe we're all set. So let's go ahead and start laying up some varnish. When I'm varnishing, I like to work from left to right. Now, that's really no particular reason. I'm right-handed, and just working from left to right just seems to be what feels most natural for me. Now, the first few strokes that I'm going to lay down on here are going to be a few inches in from the end. And I'm going to work this direction, unload my brush a little bit, and then pull my varnish back to the end of this workpiece, and then come back and coat the end of this piece. Now, if I start my brush strokes right at the tip here, I run the chance of my brush actually catching this edge, unloading my varnish, and just getting runs coming right down. So I'll start in, like I said, a few inches in, and work fairly quick, methodical but quick. And then, as you can see, I've unloaded my brush here. Now I'm pulling it back. And you want to have your film thick, you want to be laying this down somewhat thick, but not so thick that it's going to actually pool and cure too heavy on you. So now that I've worked my varnish down to the tip here, I'm just going to coat the ends really quick and then do some final smoothing strokes. Again, at this point I'm working back to the end of the piece, and when I'm working my way down, I'm going to work the whole, all three sides of this piece all the way down. I'm not going to do my face and then come back and do one edge and then come back and do the other. If I do that, I run the risk of catching a dry edge, and then the varnish just doesn't blend in real well together. Now I'm going to want to work this varnish as little as possible. Enough so that I can get it laid down uniformly, but not so much that I work the solvents out of it before the bubbles have a chance to work themselves out and pop. The more you work the varnish, the faster those solvents will evaporate. And as far as my brush, or how much pressure I'm using on the brush, it's very little. You actually want to pull the varnish and not necessarily brush the varnish on, I guess, if that makes any sense. Now, just to be on the safe side, to make sure that I don't have any heavy buildup on these vertical faces, I'm going to make a last little swipe around on my edge. Clean this up a little bit if there is anything. And also to make sure that I actually coated everything. Nothing is more frustrating, or I should say there are a few things more frustrating than going through and laying down what looks like it's going to be an excellent finish and coming back and finding that you've got some dry spots. Now, just by the nature of this, your vertical surfaces are going to get a thinner film than your flat horizontal surfaces, just because that's where you're going to have the likelihood of getting sags or runs. And when you're doing varnishing, an angle or a glare, sunlight, or any kind of a light, whether it's sunlight or artificial light, through lights, they are your best friend, because you want to be able to see the reflection in here to really be able to see what you covered and what you've missed. So now I've let this varnish sit for just a couple of minutes, and as you can see, any little bit of air that was in there from the brush strokes has worked its way out. So now what we're left with is a nice mirror finish, no air bubbles, and if I'm lucky, it'll skin over before I get any dust in here. And that is the key to getting an excellent finish. So now, with this first one done, I'm going to go ahead and coat the second one in the same manner, and then I'm just going to leave for the day, because the more I'm walking around, the more I'm doing anything in here, the more likelihood there is of kicking up some dust and getting little specks in this finish. So with that, I'm going to coat the second piece and then leave for the night. So I'll be seeing you tomorrow.